Well, welcome back to Legacy on Purpose. My name is Kyle Sanders. I am the host of this podcast and the founder of Legacy Consultants Group in Indianapolis, Indiana. And thank you so much for spending part of your day with me. It's been interesting here in Indianapolis, Indiana. I don't know where it's been or what it's been like in your part of the world. We had snow. About a week ago, which is really, really unusual for this time of year. I've got a yard that's got nothing but flowering trees and bushes, Jane magnolias and Japanese maples. And I was a little disappointed. I thought I was going to lose all these beautiful blooms and just our yard looks awesome this time of year. And then it was okay. Everything was okay. Everything turned out. None of the, only lost one tree branch. And so I don't know where it is in your side of the world, what's going on where you are. It's been interesting here in Indianapolis, that's for sure. And so I'm going to have a little different conversation with you all today than I traditionally do. Most of the time I've talked to you about courage, grit, tenacity. I've talked to you about discipline. I've talked to you about all those things. We're going to have a little bit of a different conversation today. And I'm going to share with you the softer side of growth, the softer side of becoming authentic, the softer side of all these things. And so I'm looking forward to having this conversation. I'm going to be a little vulnerable with you today. Not too vulnerable because that really isn't my shtick. I must admit, I'm not great at that. I'm still growing in that. So don't expect anything really super open-hearted there because that's not something I'm awesome at yet. Maybe one day. But I'm going to share a little bit and hopefully opening up in my ability, opening up courageously in that space in my life will serve you today. So before we get going, before I get sharing some of the things I wanted to share with you, I want to just take a pause, take a moment and thank all of you. I seriously, I sit in gratitude. Every time I put this headset on, I put this microphone in front of my mouth. When I see the soundboard light up, I just take a moment in gratitude. And it's for each and every one of you who are listening to my voice right now. It is such a gift to bring the guests we bring to you each and every week. We've got some amazing people coming up. So let me just share that with you. We have some incredible guests. It continues. I've had the honor of being on a handful of podcasts recently. So look for those in our stories. Look for those in our post. If you want to hear me expound on some wisdom with somebody dialoguing with me, those were some fun conversations. And this one will be no different. If you're enjoying our content, I want to ask you a favor. We will continue to be advertisement free for some time. And here's the reason. I want to just keep adding value and adding value and adding value to our audience. And so I would greatly appreciate, though, in this window, is you continue to share these messages, these episodes, our content with your friends. If you've enjoyed or something's resonated with you, one of our guests has resonated with you, shoot them a DM, thank them, tag them on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter. And continue to help get our message out that who you are matters more than what you have. And that truly living a life with your legacy on purpose is the most powerful thing we can do for the community we live and our family. So thank you so much in advance for sharing that information. So I want to talk to you about the softer side of growth. I want to talk to you about the softer side of becoming authentic. And I was having a conversation, just this wonderful conversation with my wife. She's a author, entrepreneur, herself. Her book, The I Am Journal, sold thousands and thousands of copies. And her and I are on this journey together. And it's of the many things I'm thankful about my relationship with my wife. One of the things I'm most thankful for is that neither one of us are stagnant, that we're holding hands and walking this journey, our own journeys that seem to overtake, and we support each other at different junctions and journeys and places. And she's been there for me and I've been there for her as we stumble through this thing of becoming our best authentic versions of ourselves. And we're talking about the process of growth. And so often you get on Instagram or any social media outlet and you get the sense that the way you get better is just to hammer yourself into the ground, into submission. And then, you get into this arm wrestling match with yourself, right? I don't know if you've seen the movie Fight Club. I must admit that was one of my go-tos in college when I had way too much time on my hands, but didn't realize it. But there's a scene, and it was Edward Norton fighting with Edward Norton. He has this fight with himself in what is soon to be no longer his boss's office, to make it look like his boss had beat him up. So he's beating himself up in his own office. And this Like, I think of this scene, this movie scene, if you haven't seen it, go YouTube Edward Norton's fight with himself in Fight Club. It's ridiculous, right? He throws himself into a glass coffee table. Like, it's insane. It's legitimately insane, like most of the movie is. And that is the often the portrayal of, hey, if you want to get in physical shape, like eat nothing but broccoli, run 5,000 miles a day, and you'll be great. Don't eat for 3 days straight and you'll lose weight. Well, yeah, no kidding, Chief. So one of the things I want to talk to you about is, how do you actually get better? How do you get better? And the gentleness of that, the gentleness that is necessary to actually grow as a human. You see, I messed this up so bad early on. I would say approximately 15 years ago, I began to recognize that who I was not who I wanted to be when I became a dad. I looked at so many aspects of how I was operating in the world and recognized that, while I certainly was not, I want to give you the misimpression that, I was a guy in jail or, a drug addict or anything of that nature. I could be a total jerk, just an absolute jerk a lot, as an example. I didn't take very good care of my body. I ate the wrong things and drank too much of the wrong things. And I was quick to temper, sharp with tongue, all these things that really, to me, a man should not be if he's going to be a father who leads boys up to be the kind of men this world needs. And I recognize that children become what they see. And I wanted my kids to see something different. And so early on in this journey to become who I am today, I had to take a hard look in the mirror and go, okay, you got some really screwed up stuff here that you see this world as. And you've got to take a different perspective. You've got to grab a different lens and look at this. And so I began that process. And early on, because of my demeanor at the moment, this kind of forceful demeanor, I took that same approach to myself and would, I don't want to say abuse myself, but I did not give myself very much grace at all during this journey. And so the three things I want to talk to you about today are surrendering, forgiveness, and vulnerability. And we began with a little bit of my vulnerability and my story. We're going to save that to the end, though, because I'm going to give you a new definition of vulnerability. I'm going to give you a new definition of it and I love all the definitions out there. We're going to give you a slightly different Kyle twist to this. So stay tuned for that piece, because I think that may be really relevant, meaningful to you men out there that are listening, or you women who have a man in your life that matters to you. Okay. So, because this is a big one for me as a daddy to a little boy. This one matters to me a ton. I'm going to talk to you about forgiveness, my story of forgiveness. It's a powerful one. I'm going to talk about it. I've alluded to it in a lot of our episodes, but I'm going to talk to you about it in a deeper, more impactful way, I hope, today. And I'm going to talk to you about surrendering. And we're going to start with surrendering. I mean, man, oh man, did I suck at surrendering. I sucked at surrendering. I mean, I just don't know another way to put it. So forgive me for the directness of that. But here's the gig. So when I was in my 20s, and I would say even in my 30s, I had a couple simple rules in my life, right? So I'll go anywhere you want to go, just I get to drive. Like, I was not really interested in your input and where I was going in my life at all, period. I wanted my hands on the steering wheel, my foot on the pedal. And even if that meant some people got ran over in the process, and I suspect that I don't suspect, I know for a fact that happened. Like, I was 100%, 110% a control freak. And now, don't get me wrong, I'm just now 93% a control freak. Okay. So I've gone from 110 to 93. So, and I say that a little kiddingly, but here's what I've learned in surrendering. Let me talk to you about it through the gift of my kids. So I have 3 kids. My wife and I are expecting number 4. Yes, I know we're outnumbered. Yes, I am Catholic, if you were wondering. So we have 3 kids. 4th one's on the way, and couldn't be more excited. And here's what I've learned. And I've learned so much from being a daddy. I've learned so much. My kids teach me more than I teach them about life. We teach each other. I mean, I got to be honest with you. They don't realize it. They don't know it, that they're some of my greatest teachers, but they teach me a ton. And so let me share an example. I'm going to share a couple of them. It's a couple stories. They're going to ground this, and I'm going to give you kind of a grown-up takeaway on this as well. So my wife breastfeeds our kids. She does, right? So, and she's extraordinarily dedicated to that process. And so what that means is, all of our kids are born and attached to mom a lot. She's a source of life and she's a source of food. And so my role as dad early on is just to take care of mom and baby. That's it. So I'm making sure there's food on the table. I'm picking up the laundry duties, helping out with the cleaning, like just making sure mom's comfortable because she's pretty busy keeping baby healthy and alive, right? So there becomes this window where, you know, our kids are much more attached to my wife than they are me. And I'm a kid lover. I was going to be a school teacher before I got my degree in finance. So there's been and has been in the past some pretty emotional times where like I want to hold my kid, but yet they have no interest in me at all. Period. They want mom. They've been with mom all day. Dad gets home from work and they still want mom. And I'm like, hey, what's up with that? Like, come on, what? And so there were times with my son that this would bother me. And then what I watched evolved is I just surrendered this. I said, okay, this is just a month. This is just a couple months. Because I've learned that this passes in phases and their favorites change. So I'm not going to get bothered by this because I got the rest of my life with this kid. So I'm not going to get worried or get upset or the kid doesn't love me. And so I had my youngest, my Elizabeth. My wife had been mainly on bedtime duty with her. I take care of the older two, read to them, tuck them in, tell them a story, that kind of thing. It's wonderful. One of my favorite times of the day. And Lauren's really been on Elizabeth the entire time. Well, then Elizabeth found out that I'm a pretty creative storyteller and she loves bunnies. And the next thing you know, she's wanting me every night. She wants a bunny story every single night. So now I tuck the older two in and read to them. And then the last 5 minutes of Elizabeth's bedtime routine is daddy coming in and holding her and telling her a story. And I get to show up my way. And the reason that gets to happen is because I stayed patient and knew that at some point it'd be fine. And what's beautiful is this moment happens 6 months before the next child's coming, when Elizabeth is going to have to allow me to rock her to sleep and help her get down to bedtime, that she chose it at her time, at her pace, which was perfect and aligned with our world and our life unfolding. So here's what I've learned about surrendering. Here's a takeaway to that story, is that when we force something, it often happens at the wrong time. The outcome is rarely the best and most beautiful it could be. But when we let go of the details and focus on outcomes, but let go of the details of the process and allow those to unfold their own way to truly not force the flower open and allow it to bloom, the outcome is much more beautiful. Now, we certainly can't do that with everything. Like, well, I'm surrendering to doing my taxes. I'm just going to put the paperwork over there and just surrender to the process and it'll get done. Like, no. I'm going to surrender to my dishes. I'm just going to leave them in the sink and surrender. And when they feel like washing themselves, they'll be wonderful. It's not what I'm saying. It's not what I'm saying. So let me be very clear with you. Like, is that one of the things that I've learned is becoming more authentic, becoming our better version of ourselves, is that patience with ourselves, patience and surrendering to the process of growth and knowing, I used to say, I will be better at this. I will get over this. I won't be like this forever. The truth is, humility is a gift from God. And some of our humility comes from our human condition. And some of the human conditions that you and I have are there to remind us of our fragility, of our imperfections, to remind us that we are not perfect in the way we operate. And it's why there is a creator in this world that I believe in. I believe in God. And so to me, that relationship of knowing that we're going to have flaws and that we're still perfect with our flaws is a key attribute. And so for us to sit here and say, well, someday I'm never going to get upset again. Come on, really? And that's literally what I went into this whole process of growth thinking, is that someday I'll never lose my temper. That's probably not going to be the case. Maybe it will be. I don't know. What I focus on is surrendering to the fact that today isn't going to be the day and tomorrow is unlikely going to be either. And I'm going to continue to grow in that space, but there may be a day where I do, and that's okay. And we'll begin again. And as long as I work towards recognizing where those things happen and learning to navigate around those, that's the key. So surrendering the process. You aren't going to control how quickly you grow. You aren't going to control how quickly your children grow. You aren't going to control how quickly anything grows. And the more we force, the less likely it will grow. You can't force a flower to open. If you do, you'll destroy it. And so you must surrender to the process of growth, which is the hardest thing for us control freaks out there. It is. I'm an efficiency guy, control freak. How can we get it done? How can we do it more efficiently, cheaper, faster, quicker, blah, blah, blah. That's me. And now you're telling me I can't control it? Yeah, I am. I am. And the only thing I could tell you in the most beautiful way possible is that when you learn to do that, you'll grow even faster than you ever can imagine. You'll take leaps instead of steps. You'll fly instead of walk. Learning to surrender is one of the most powerful things you can learn to do as you look to become the most powerful, most authentic version of yourself. Learn to let it go. All right, let's dig into forgiveness. That could be it. Like that alone could be the entire conversation. So I'm telling you, I'm bringing you some rich content today. So thank you for sticking through all this, because each one of these things I've lived. I'm not reading this out of a book, folks. Like I've lived every bit of this. These are all things I've had to work through myself as a husband, as a father, as a leader, as a man. These are all things I've had to navigate myself. Men typically don't talk about this stuff. I don't know why we should. So I hope these are true gifts. Let's talk about forgiveness. Now I'm going to talk about two things. I could talk about 20 things, but I'm going to talk about two things. And I'm going to talk about them because, one, I could talk about these without divulging relationship issues or things, or just not going to hurt anyone by what I'm talking about is what I'm sharing. But what I'm going to share with you is ubiquitous. This is all encompassing. These are things that, like, these stories are very transferable in your own life. That's why I want to talk about them, because these are big ones. I'm going to talk about forgiveness in big ways, not little ways. I'm not talking about someone stepping on my toes here in a minute. So if you're hearing a couple personal things about me is going to bother you, just hit stop now. But this matters. So when I was 2.5 years old, some men broke into my grandfather's house. I've never talked about this on air in detail. By the way, if you're a true crime junkie and you're going to listen to the rest of this because you want to know more about my grandfather's murder, please stop. Please don't. I'm not sharing this story to glorify murder or to entertain you. I'm sharing this to teach you. So just I'm going to say that right up front. So I'm not sharing this for entertainment purposes. There's a teachable moment in this. That's why. I'm sharing this to serve you. That's the only reason. So when I was 2.5 years old, some men broke into my grandfather's house for the purpose of robbing him. He lived on a very large farm in Ohio, middle of nowhere. There was something going on beyond just robbing him that none of my family knows. While there, they stole one of his guns. And my grandfather, he was a hunter. He was a farmer. He was just brilliant in many, many ways. Great businessman and an investor. I took one of his guns, and while he was weed eating around one of the silos, they shot him and killed him. And this was, 1982, 1983. It was July 1982, and there's no DNA. There's none of that jazz. There isn't the advanced crime labs. This is way pre-CSI. And so the natural inclination is to think a family member did it. So they put the entire family through polygraph tests, which of course they all pass, and now the case is cold. In this case, it's cold, unsolved, from the time I'm 2.5 until the time I'm in 5th grade. And my brother and I get off the school bus one day. Grew up on a much smaller farm, but walk down the driveway. It's about a 100-yard driveway. And my mom and dad are at the doorway to greet us as we get off the bus. Now, let me just share with you, this was not normal. And they're like, we have some exciting news to share with you. In retrospect, I don't think exciting was the right word selection, but that was the word they selected. And my brother and I are thinking, are we getting a Nintendo? That was like the first thing we thought, are we getting a Nintendo? And they share with us that they've arrested the men who murdered my grandfather. And my brother's in 6th grade, I'm in 5th grade, and we're kind of like, okay. Like, I don't even, in 5th grade, I don't have the emotional capacity to process what was just told to me. And so months later, I'm sitting in a courtroom for the trial of one of the men who killed my grandfather. And it was a crazy experience. I don't even know how to put it in words to, in retrospect, of what that experience was like. And many of the details are not relevant for the point that I'm going to share with you. But to say it was emotional for my family, I mean, I had nightmares and it was awful. It was absolutely awful. You would think that this would bring a family a ton of relief, but I'd done a pretty good job at burying that this was part of my story until that point. It's like, oh, that thing, that thing, that's there. So, it's all front and center, and you're seeing faces and people and stories and testimony and seeing some things at fifth grade. Like, if this was on a movie, my parents probably would not allowed me to watch it. Like, I'm watching Little House on the Prairie still, but I'm sitting in the courtroom for, felony murder charges because my entire family was there and they had no place to take me, is what I believe was a lot of the reason. So this was a really crazy time. And 3 out of the 4 people go to jail. They all get convicted. One of them, who confessed the crime, was also had severe medical issues going on. So, but they all went to jail, and some of them for very long periods of time. And I got to write victim testimonies and to the parole board of why these people should spend a lot of time in jail. It's crazy, crazy experience. And you can imagine, you might be feeling it for me. Here's a little kid who loses his grandpa. I didn't really get to know my grandfather very well at all. Who then is sitting with, cousins who literally never met him. He was, in the courtroom, and my brother and I were the only of his grandchildren that ever met him, his oldest grandchildren. That's pretty sad. And then what if I told you, as you can imagine, how much I hated those men? Here's a fifth grader who's thinking about literally killing the people who killed his grandfather when he gets older. I had some really crazy thoughts of what I was going to do to those men if I ever got my hands on them. In fifth grade, I certainly couldn't have done much. I mean, I think I weighed 70 pounds when I was wet, something, I mean, what am I going to do? But I had some horrible thoughts. I hated them. And hate's a terrible word. It's an awful word. And it's certainly one, like, we throw it around. Like, I hate Brussels sprouts. Actually, I think they're delicious. But, people say this, like, I hate this food or hate that food. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm truly hate. Like, wishing ill and harm and ill will against another human being. Like, that is a terrible thing to carry on your heart. So I went to church camp when I was a kid. I'd spent a week in the mountains of North Carolina, right outside of Asheville, in a little town called Montreat, where the late Billy Graham would speak. He's got a conference center there, where the late Dr. Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. spoke. It is hallowed ground by holy men and women who have spoken there and spent time there. And I had the honor of going there multiple times as a child, as a kid, as a young adult. And in 8th grade, someone stood up and spoke. They preached on the Lord's Prayer. And if you're not familiar, there's a couple different key changes, but they're the same thing, which was, forgive our trespassers if we forgive those who trespass against us. Forgive our debts as we forgive our debtors. A couple different versions of that prayer. And this minister chose to speak on forgiving others. And there they are in front of the 400 or 500 kids, and they're talking about forgiveness. And they knew these were thankfully some bright adults. They knew they were getting ready to stick a stick in a hornet's nest and rip it open, because they knew there were some kids in that congregation who had gone through some stuff, maybe abuse, maybe So they had folks in the back there that you can go talk to. They had counselors, and changed my life. Changed my life. I sat down with a woman, and I told her my story. Like, I'm telling you, these are the facts. This is what I've gone through. This is what I've experienced. This is how I'm feeling. And she introduced me to the concept of forgiveness. And she helped me understand that hating them wasn't going to change the course of anything. And then, through conversation and lots of tears, I held her hand. This bigger-than-life African-American woman, the sweetest woman I've ever met in my life. I wish I could meet her today. And gosh, what a blessing if she hears this. We prayed for the forgiveness of the people who killed my grandfather. We prayed for their forgiveness together in that little room in the back of that church in Montreat, North Carolina. And I walked out of there like 1,000 pounds of bricks had been lifted off of me. And what it taught me is something that served my entire life. You see, hate doesn't change anything, ever. But forgiveness does. And the real gift of forgiveness is what it does for you inside yourself. You see, I don't think those men meant to kill my grandfather. One of them did. But I certainly think that if they had the opportunity to do it again, they'd have chosen a different way, like most of us would, with the worst decisions we've ever made. Now, that one's pretty egregious, I must admit. I really wish it wasn't part of my story. But what the gift of forgiveness has given me is to understand, truly understand, that the majority of the time that people make a decision, at the moment, they feel stuck. They don't know what to do. They feel that there's no other pathway forward, that there's nothing else that they can do other than this horrible thing that they later look back and realize was the worst thing they could have ever done in the moment. They change it in a moment if you gave them the chance, but they don't get the chance, and there isn't a chance. And so we run around hating people who, candidly, for a lot of them, hate themselves for it as well. And so you got two broken people instead of just one, the person who committed the crime or the act that is unforgivable by most or for themselves. And so not only did you lose the person you love in this instance, my grandfather, but you lose a part of yourself as well. And if you're living that way, it is a shadow to your greatness. It is just that simple. You cannot be as great as you want to be or could be. You cannot live your legacy on purpose, running around with hate in your heart. So my father was an alcoholic. Yeah, I told you we're going to get deep. I was warning you, pause it if it's a problem. My father was an alcoholic. This wasn't a choice by him. It isn't for any addict. We're getting ready to interview a guy here in a few weeks. It's just an unreal story about his struggles with addiction and recovery. And so my father ran into a window in his life where alcohol got the better of him. And I choose my words very intentionally here. He raised two daughters at that time. His oldest daughters did not meet him at a time where alcoholism had shown up in his life. He was headed that direction, I suspect. I wasn't born yet, so I don't know. I wasn't there, right? But my father, in 8th grade, my father went into a rehab center. And before that, I've never met a person who is their best self while drinking at all. That's why I don't drink. I quit years ago for this exact reason, because none of us are our best selves under the influence of anything. It's just my belief. You can disagree with me, that's fine. But again, a little encouragement. If you want to become the best version of yourself, stop drinking. Just my opinion. So my dad goes into rehab, comes home, and has trouble adjusting to life without that escape. And all the turmoil, all the things you'd expect, like go and grab the paintbrush of what you'd expect life might have been like with a father struggling with addiction. And I experienced a lot of it. And I'm not going to share a lot of the details because, one, I told you already that I'm not great with vulnerability. And two, I love my father. And so I don't want to tarnish his reputation because of this challenge that he didn't ask for. But there was a lot of relationship challenges, a lot of communication challenges, all those things. And both before he stopped drinking and afterwards. Well, he got better over time. He did. He learned to deal with life again. He learned how to communicate again the best he could of a man of that generation. My dad's 82 years old. He learned how to have fun again. He learned how to relax again. He learned to do a lot of things again. He went to meetings consistently and learned to live and love and be with his family again. Of the many things in my life that I'm grateful for, this is one of the ones that I am the most grateful for, is the fact that my father is no longer an addict, an active addict. And I'm very thankful that he found recovery. And for Alcohol Anonymous and AA meetings, I don't even have the words. But one of the things that never happened is a good quality dialogue to my father and I about all the things we experienced. He couldn't bring himself to it. And so I did. So in college, I called my father. Now, mind you, two guys, I'm in my 20s, late teens, early 20s. So if you're thinking this is going to be like a Hallmark movie moment that I'm about ready to share with you, it was not, but it was powerful. And I'm going to share with you how simple this can be. So most of you may be listening to this saying, I have someone in my life. Maybe they went through addiction. Maybe you went through a divorce and your kids mother or father still in your life, and you got a lot of anger towards that person. And it's disrupting you. And you see it's disrupting you in the way you live and the way you love and the way you show up. So I call my father, and he's totally not expecting it. And I said, Dad, I just want to talk to you about something. He's like, okay, what's going on? And I said, I know there's a good chance you feel pretty guilty for some of the stuff that happened when I was younger, when you were drinking. And you don't need to say anything right now, Dad. I just want you to listen for a second. I said, you probably feel pretty bad about that stuff. There's things you probably reflect on and you wish didn't happen. You probably wish you could change it all. And you can't. And that's okay. I just want you to know all of it, every bit of it. I forgive you and I love you. And you and I never need to talk about it again. But I just wanted you to know from me to you, I love you and I forgive you. That was it. That was the entire conversation. Now, what if I told you I have an amazing relationship with my dad? What if I told you that? What if I told you we've gone to Michigan, had vacations together, just him and I, gone fishing, not caught much fish, but had a lot of fun? What if I told you that I talked to him a lot? And yeah, maybe my relationship with my dad might look a little different that had not been part of our story when I was younger. But I could tell you it looks a whole lot different than it would have had I never said that to him and shared that with him. For me. You see, I see him differently. I see the relationship differently. I've let all that down. I don't know what it did for him. He never really, he got a little emotional and thanked me and didn't really know what to say. I must admit that. He got pretty choked up and this is a guy who doesn't do that. But here's the gift it gave me. I can move beyond it in my relationship. You see, I knew I wasn't going to be out of relationship with my father ever. If I hadn't quit on him with that stuff, there was unlikely going to be anything I was going to quit on him, going forward. This is a guy who had trouble putting together a desk in college, and he dropped everything, drove 2 hours to help me put together a desk for my, apartment. This was a guy who was showing up in my life. He made a mistake. It's okay. And so here's what I'm going to talk to you about, just for a couple more minutes, and then we're going to move on to the next piece. Is it not only are there people in your life that are still going to be in your life that you're not going to walk away from, their family, you're your kid's mother or father, they're fill in the blank. You aren't going to walk away from this person, but you walk away that there's a part of them that you hate or some other descriptor to that is less than love. And it's interrupting a lot of your life, a lot of it. And so my point to you is this. You don't need to know the right words. You just need to know a few. And those few that I just shared with you would serve you very well. You see, forgiveness is not this complex thing. So you see, I don't like what my dad did. I don't like what those men did to my grandfather. I wish those were not part of my story, but they are. And there's not a darn thing that I can do to change that they are. What I can do is learn to, 1, surrender to the fact that they are, and 2, forgive the people who put them in my way. That's all I can control. Let me say that again. I can surrender to the fact that they're part of my story. They're not going anywhere. That's the facts. They're not going anywhere. And the more I fight that, the more I try to push back at that or want something to be different, the more it just gets in my face. They're part of my story. I don't think about them much. I don't think about them much at all. In fact, the only time I think about these truths, when it's obvious that my truth, my story, might help somebody that I'm further along in my journey than they are. That where I'm at is a few more steps in front of somebody else. And if I share with somebody how they can walk those steps without falling too far or hurting themselves in the process, or worse yet, taking steps backwards, then I share it. And that's it. It's as simple as that for me. And there's a huge difference between forgiving the person and forgiving the act. You see, I'm not suggesting that you need to forgive the act of murder. You think I forgive the fact that these people killed my grandfather? No. Are you kidding? No, absolutely not. It's not an okay thing, and it's never going to be an okay thing. I didn't get to know the man. They took that from me. Don't misunderstand me. I'm not like, oh, gee, that was okay. Thanks for. No, Not at all. Quite the opposite. Do you think I'm like, oh, it was great that my dad would get blackout drunk? No, not at all. Period. That's a little bit different because I believe alcoholism and addiction is a disease. It's a manifestation of mental illness. But so it's a little bit different scenario. But you think I'm like, gee, jolly good. This is great. You know what every kid needs? Like, this is a formula for success. Every child needs an alcoholic parent because it makes the greatest experience for young people. No. Here's what I know. Here's what I know is that you can forgive the person and not the behavior, not the decision, not the act. Those are two separate things. And why does that matter? Like, why am I talking about forgiveness and surrendering in a podcast focused on being your best self, living your legacy on purpose, being authentic? Because here's the truth, right? Are you ready for this? If you can't surrender to the process of becoming better, if you cannot forgive others, you can't forgive yourself. And if you cannot have forgiveness in your heart for others, you will constantly limit what you can do because you see failures in the process of this journey. You are going to fail along the way. And so if all you do is hold everybody else to these ridiculous standards of being nothing but perfect, guess who you're also holding to a ridiculous standard of being nothing but perfect? You, yourself. And so the greatest gift I can give you of learning to forgive somebody for something that you perceive as unforgivable up until maybe this conversation is that it also gives you the opportunity to forgive yourself for things you perceived as unforgivable. And when you learn to forgive yourself, then you're going to be willing to take more risks, dare more greatly, risk the potential of falling face down in the arena, knowing you'll forgive yourself and pick yourself up and move forward. All right, the last thing I'm going to talk to you about today. Like, let's throw surrendering, forgiveness, and vulnerability all in one podcast. All right. Look, like, I'm a vegan, but I just love the analogy. We're going with the meat, not the potatoes today. All right. We're going the full thing. Because without these things, without these key pieces, you got no chance. You got no chance. You can't just be hard. You got to learn to be intentionally soft. So vulnerability is recognizing the humanity in each of us. Accepting your own humanity. You see, vulnerability is opening up to the truth that we are all human, regardless of gender. And to be human means that we have a whole rainbow of emotions, all of us. Whether we're great at expressing those or not, we all have the full rainbow of emotions. And there's days we feel blue. There's days we feel happy and sunshiny and yellow. There's days we feel red and ragey. We feel all of it. You may not see it on someone's face as they walk down the sidewalk. You may not see it in their Instagram posts or their Facebook posts. You may not see it in your interactions. But to me, vulnerability is seen in the humanity of everyone. And recognizing that and creating space for that. I wrote a whole book a couple years ago and haven't published it because I've got 3 young kids, and the process of publishing a book and the amount of time it would take away, I'm not willing to do at this. But I want to talk about vulnerability. I want to talk about vulnerability and masculinity in this whole piece for just a minute. I want to speak to all of you who are a man or have a man in your life or a child or a son or anyone. And I'm not saying that women don't have trouble with vulnerability. I know you do. I just am not a woman. So I can't speak from that lens of perspective. And it's not my place to speak what it's like to be a woman and deal with vulnerability issues because I'm not that arrogant. I struggle with this myself, so I certainly am not not going to begin to guide here. So let me talk about vulnerability through the eyes of a man. And I want to talk to you about it through 2 pieces. What we wish you would know and what you think you know that you don't. So I believe, and I've talked to enough guys, that there are 2 pieces that most men are very concerned about. One is that we are afraid of being failures. All of us. All of us. Define that through your own words. But we're all afraid of being failures. We're afraid of letting our families down, our kids down, our employees down. We're afraid of failing, desperately afraid of failing and being seen as a failure. We still are that 6 and 7-year-old kid standing against the wall, hoping to get picked first and getting picked last instead. We're that kid. And we're afraid of failing the people we love the most. We're terrified of it, quite candidly. And so many of the times we are hiding that fear from all of you. Now, please don't go home and go, Kyle told me to ask you if you're. No, because we also suck at talking about it. But if your husband or your spouse is having a tough day at the office and things aren't going really well, and they're dealing with some challenges emotionally due to it, and they're navigating through that their own way, understand the reason they feel that way is likely because they're afraid of letting you down and being a failure. And any way you can help them uniquely through that without asking them to talk about it a ton, unless they want to, unless you have that kind of man, would be powerful. That's for adult men. Adult men is vulnerability. We're all very afraid. I was told that you see a man as tall, dark, and handsome, rides in on a white horse. We heard the fairy tales too, folks. We heard those too. Well, I'm 5'6". I'm about as pale as they get. I don't have a six-pack, no matter how many miles I run. And I'm scared to death of getting on top of a horse. Those things terrify me. That's just not even normal to be on one of those things, right? So there's no chance there's going to be a white horse, tall, dark, and handsome. We've heard it. For many of us, it's never going to happen. We aren't the fairy tale unless you let us feel like that, which is pretty awesome because I have that at home. But many men don't. Many men are very, very terrified of letting you all down, letting themselves down. And I struggle with this big time, personally. In fact, to the point where I've got a boot on my foot because I wouldn't give up on a 50-mile race no matter how injured I was. And there's some room for that. That's a good thing sometimes. But for most of us, it's not. Let me talk to you through the filter of a daddy. So my son comes up to me the other day. He's 6. He's a beautiful 6-year-old. Just awesome. He talks to me about being scared. And he hopes about being fearful and worried and nervous about something. And I sit on my bottom. I get below his eye level, so he's looking down at me. And I put his little hands in my hands. And I look him right in the eye. And I say, William, that was one of the most courageous things I've ever experienced. I want to thank you for sharing with me how you feel right now. And it really means the world to me that you trusted me enough to tell me how you're feeling. I'm going to say that again. I sat down below his eye level, put his hands in my hands, and told him how courageous he was for telling me how he feels. It didn't matter what he was scared about. It didn't matter what made him nervous. It didn't matter whether I thought how he was feeling made sense or not. It's how he felt. So you see, we train our kids. I deal with emotions that I feel as an adult because how I was trained to deal with the emotions I felt as a child. Now, at that time, my parents thought they were doing the right thing. They did. What we've learned is why men have such a very high suicide rate. It's because we're not permitted to experience the full spectrum of the emotions of humanity and show up with true vulnerability and be honest about what we're dealing with. And we're trained like that as kids. And so as adults, men have a much higher suicide rate than women. Much higher. It's not good. And so one of the key things I want to talk to you about on vulnerability here today is that it's got to stop. It's got to stop. It matters. Allow the people you love to feel the things they feel. And if you're a parent, stop this crazy idea that your kids aren't going to have emotions and feelings. Create space for them. My youngest the other day had a complete temper tantrum. She's screaming at me. Just screaming. I just sat on the ground and looked at her and talked to her calmly. I put on my late night, as Chris Voss says, my late night FM DJ voice. Mike, I can see you're upset right now. I know. It's okay. I understand you're upset. I know. It's okay. I hear you. I hear you. For quality 4 or 5 minutes, I did that. And then suddenly she stopped. She blinked. She looked at me. And I looked at her and said, "Would you like to give me a hug?" I asked her, I said, "Would you like to give me a hug?" I didn't say give me a hug. I said, "Would you like to give me a hug?" She shook her little head yes and gave me a great big hug. And I said, "Do you want to give me a running hug?" She backed up and then gave me another. I said, "Would you like to give me another one?" And she just hugged me over and over and over and over again. My older two are watching this. And I looked at them and I said, "I want you to understand that I'll always listen to you. Always. Doesn't matter if you know how to communicate how you're feeling, easily or not easily. Doesn't matter if the emotions you're feeling are big and scary and they come out in weird ways. I'll listen to you. And I'll hug and love you afterwards, even if it comes out wrong." And they look at me like big wide eyes. My wife's just butterflies towards me at this moment, right? Sometimes I get it right as a dad. Sometimes I get it wrong. And this was a time I got it right. You see, one of the biggest things in vulnerability I want to talk to you about, and I'm talking to you about right now, is that the gift of you learning to be vulnerable is the ability to be comfortable with vulnerability with your own kids. And the only way we deal with the serious relationship and emotional issues that are prevalent in our country today is to begin to chip away at our inability to be vulnerable with one another. And to me, vulnerability is just to recognize the humanity in another and the humanity in yourself. That we all have emotions. They can get pretty big sometimes, and that's okay. It's totally okay. These three things, these gentle, these soft, the delicate side of growth, surrendering, forgiveness, vulnerability. Each of these has played an enormous role in my life as I've become the more authentic, greater, grander version of myself, as I've become closer to what I was put on this earth to be, as I've worked through all the things that are necessary to lead, to grow, to impact, to serve. These key things have made all the difference. I shared them with you today, and I shared a lot of stories with you about my life because it matters. Because I want you to understand that what I'm speaking to you about and what I'm trying to share with you on this podcast is not something I read in a book. It's not something I just learned through these guests that we have on. I've lived it, and I live it daily. And I welcome you on this journey with me. You see, your legacy is going to be not necessarily the money you leave behind, which may be some of it. It's not going to be the business you built, while that may be part of it. And not maybe the house that you paid off, while that may be part of it. You see, the most important legacy you're going to leave, that in my opinion, is it is far better for somebody to come from a healthy family than a wealthy family. It is better for somebody to come from a healthy family than a wealthy family. And part of being healthy is a softer side of growth. And so I thank you for the opportunity to share this wisdom with you, to share my story with you, to share with you these pieces, these components, these key puzzle pieces that I hope helps unlock your life in a more meaningful way. Again, I thank you for being with me this week. I thank you for listening to what I have shared with you. If this has been meaningful to you, if what I've shared with you has caught you, and you say, I'm going to be able to really take this forward, share this with a friend, share this with somebody, please. Don't let my story and what I've shared with you end here. Share it with somebody else. I thank you for your time. I can't wait to have you here again next week where we have another guest coming on. And I just wish you all well. And I thank you so much for being part of my community. Until next time, go out and live your legacy on purpose.